Well, warmest greetings to you one and all. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, coming to you as always from an undisclosed location somewhere deep in the heartland of America, coming from the heartland to your heart. At least that is our hope. This is Monday night. That means it's the last stand. And tonight, I am very happy to welcome back a fellow that I consider an old friend. He's not old, but he's an old friend. And Micah is a podcaster. He's a writer. He's a great commentator. He's also an adventurer. Micah, that's an absolutely insufficient introduction, but please tell the folks here on The Last Stand who you are and some of the great stuff that you do, my friend. And welcome. It's good to see you again.
Well, it's really good to be here. If not brothers by blood, then brothers in spirit. Very much so.
Absolutely. And I want to say this before we even get started. When I first met Micah Hanks, we met at a deal that we were both speaking at, and Micah was even then near the top of his game, and I was just starting the game. And it always says something to me when a guy that is a professional, recognized, already been on coast to coast, already what you would call a big shot, took the time to sit down with me, give me information, give me guidance, give me pointers. And Micah, that's always stood out to me. I've always remembered that. And I think it speaks to the type of individual that you are.
Well, I mean, what can you do in life if you can't help other people? I mean, and I really believe that too. I mean, there is so much divisiveness, both, I guess you might say it's really human nature. It's almost really kind of endemic to human nature.
Right.
And, I mean, we could talk about that, but I mean, it's something I've seen you address in the past. It's something that we hear about every day. And, one thing I've noticed, especially although social media is a wonderful thing and it keeps us in touch, I've also noticed that seems to amplify whatever that base issue is within ourselves, the pettiness, the anger, the jealousy. And we have terminology for this these days, trolling, things like this.
Exactly.
It's unfortunate that those base elements of our existence have been amplified so much with all this wondrous technology that's all around us. And so, for my own part, a few years ago, I kind of disengaged from social media, and I catch a little flack from people. I think they misinterpret that as being, he hasn't got time for me. He's too busy. It's no joke. I am busy. I'm a very busy person. You know how that is. If you really want to try and do what you want to do, it requires incredible amounts of work. But the other thing is, man, I got to a point with the amplification of the nonsense that I had to just kind of disengage from so much of that. And I feel it has made me a healthier, happier person. And what it is amplified in the void created by the social media nonsense and removing some of that has been an opportunity to focus more on what kind of person do I want to be? How do I want to be in my community, whether it be in an online community where we share ideas or right here in my neighborhood? How do you want to be? Who do you want to be? What do you want to do for other people? What is your path? What are your goals? And most importantly, how can you help other people? So for my own part, that's really important to me. And if I ever have an opportunity, love to sit down with people, love getting to hang out and talk to you. You had a lot more facial hair last time I saw you.
A lot more hair, a lot more facial hair, and I weighed about 60 pounds more. So there's been a couple of changes.
Looking great though, man. Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Tell people what it is you do. And I know you have the Grayling Report. And as you tell people what you're doing, please tell us what that whole philosophy, that word Grayling, what it means and what kind of a philosophy that it encapsulates, please.
Sure. It's a long, weird story. And especially since the podcast, which had that name, has recently changed after, what is it? Almost a decade. And we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, the journey for me kind of began with, the launch of a website called the Grayling Report. And to me, it meant, again, and it was actually even put to me like this by the late Philip Coppens, who was a friend of mine. He was kind of known for being not only an alternative history kind of research, but a researcher, but he was also he'd been on the Ancient Aliens program, things like that. But I didn't ever consider him really part of that crowd, if that makes sense, because he was always more interested in mysteries of the Bible, secret societies, ancient history, and things like that. So I always respected him and loved his work. And he came on the show one time and he said, "It is a wonderful world where you can have words like Grail and alien together." And to me, that's what it always meant. Again, alien encapsulates really well, are we alone in the universe? If we found out that we were not, that would be not only the answer to one of the greatest questions that we have, but it would be the single greatest, probably, scientific discovery in all time. And of course, the Grail, the Holy Grail, although that idea actually maybe goes back much further than Christianity itself, it is most prevalent in that Christian icon.
Right.
That element, the Holy Grail. But it's also, generally speaking, many borrow it just to mean, the pursuit of the great, the almighty, whatever it is, the ultimate, and truest essence of what you seek in life. So for me, that's what Grailian meant. It was a portmanteau, a combination of those two words. And I still have that website. It's a blog. It's been running for more than a decade. Science news, history, archaeology, science, culture, all kinds of different stuff on that site. But I actually had a podcast of the same name for a long time, which has recently made the change. It is now simply the Micah Hanks program. Lots of reasons for that change. It's not about, I got to have my name on everything. I mean, honestly, I think that there are so many shifts right now, Jeffrey, in the dialogue and the way that things are being discussed, that it just felt right. Sometimes you just got to kind of make the shift, make the change. I know you've done that too. And so
absolutely.
So here we are. Yeah. Micah Hanks, host of the Micah Hanks program. Easy to find, easier to remember.
And that's important. And, you've been on Coast to Coast. You've also done some work with George Noory. I know that you've co-hosted some events there locally, and we get to hear George on the radio, and we get to see George on Beyond Belief. What's it like to sit down with George across the table, share a beverage, and just kind of hang out as guys? What is the great icon George Noory really like when it's just you and him sitting across the table?
He's a really nice person.
I get that.
He's a really great guy, and he loves music. George is the kind of person who, every time I see him, Micah, do you think we could do this one? Because, I've been a guitarist in the live band that he has used on 2 occasions now.
I have to stop you, Micah. Micah is a hell of a guitarist. If you ought to type, you got to tell me where they can find it on YouTube, because this guy can flat play a guitar, ladies and gentlemen, and he's from North Carolina. I'm from Florida, so we get some good bluegrass going, and I love your music, and it is jamming, brother.
Well, if you go online, you can usually just search for Micah Hanks. Also, the group that I've played with off and on for a number of years, I was doing this full time for a long time. It was called Nitro Grass, and I still play with the band. But the thing is that with my schedule doing more of this kind of thing, I'm not able to perform full time with the band like I once did. But the banjo player in the group, who still maintains the band, and again, we play at least once a month, usually more than that, is Charles Wood. Charles is a 2-time national banjo player, 2-time national champion banjo player. Sorry.
Wow.
He was, again, one of the many claims to fame that he has is he actually appeared on the David Letterman program with Steve Martin, Earl Scruggs, and a bunch of other guys. It was incredible. It was called 5 Guys with Banjos Who Know How to Use Them. Just look online for David Letterman.
Sounds great.
Yeah, Foggy Mountain Breakdown, Steve Martin. You'll see that. But anyway, there's Charles Wood at about 1 minute and 50 seconds into the video. Younger guy, full suit, just rips the neck off the thing. So Charles and I met a few years ago. You would say maybe that we are both, he's classically trained. I've got a background in rock and roll and country and stuff. We happen to play bluegrass, but our interests, it's well beyond that. Now,
you kind of look like a top 40 country star right now, rocking the way you're sitting there and what you're rocking.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. As we get older, we could only hope we get, better with age, like fine wine, right, Jeffrey?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but so it's not bluegrass when we're playing with George Noory. George's thing is when he comes to town, and there may be some videos on YouTube of George Noory. If you look for George Noory live, Asheville, North Carolina, I don't know if they allow taping, but somebody may have actually filmed something. But
what does George play?
He doesn't play. He's a singer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. George sings, and actually, in my opinion, he's a pretty good singer too. He loves a lot of the old classics. This last time he came to town, we did a tune. Many people would remember the Andy Williams song "Moon River."
Oh yes,
remember that?
I love Moon River. I can just hear George in my head singing it right now.
Yeah, his voice, it lends itself to that style, and so we do a lot of those kind of things. But it's a fun thing. But when it's just George, and it's kind of funny when you're just sitting and talking to him, because there's a great disconnect, which I think most of us have experienced. I'm sure that, your listeners, when they meet you, probably experience the same sort of thing. It's like
they all think I should, they all say, I thought you'd be taller.
Oh, no, hold on. I think you and I are just about the same height. So,
well, I'm just telling you the reporting the real truth, Micah.
I know how tall you are, so you can't sneak one by me. But no, George, it's the disconnect is that he is just, he's your uncle, he's your neighbor. He'll never have much more than about one glass of wine, but we'll be sitting there and he's wanting to talk about music. That's his thing. And, quick funny story too. When he was celebrating his 14th year on the radio, his producer, Tom Danheiser, called me and he said, look, Micah, I know it's last minute, but can you call in tonight or can I call you and can we bring you on just to kind of say happy anniversary, happy 14th to George? And I said, oh yeah, sure. Of course. So I stay up all night, I'm drinking coffee and everything.
Right.
And he calls and he says, okay, we'll get you on in just a second. So I hear George doing the introduction, right? And he goes, well, I got to tell you folks, I've known some really good musicians in my day. And right now on the line, we have one of the best guitar players I have ever had the pleasure to know. And I'm just sitting there kind of going, oh, shucks and everything. On the telephone waiting to go live. And he goes, Billy Gibbons, how are you? And so here I am on the call and I hear, hey, George, what's going on? So there's Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top. And I'm like the fly on the wall on a three-way call listening in on this going, wow. So when he lets him go and everything, like a couple of minutes later, another great guitar player that I got to do a performance with earlier this year, Micah Hanks. Micah, how are you? And I said, well, I can tell you one thing, George. I now know what it's like to be in the presence of greatness.
That's for sure.
Billy Gibbons. Now, look, I can play guitar, but that guy got the mojo.
Yeah, that's interesting. And isn't it funny, Micah, you do the music, and I've just started back into the stand-up comedy world, and doing this is great. Doing this is really something, but something about a live audience and something about the instant feedback, something about that energetic connection, be it stand-up comedy, be it music, be it maybe the theater, there's really something there, isn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's a funny thing because I've done live radio for years, but when you're live like this, it's very interesting because psychologically it may be unspoken, but there's this element of, okay, you got to get it right the first time. Mm-hmm. And when you're performing in any context, whether it's a live web stream or whether you're on a stage, now it helps, I think, to be on a stage where, like you said, there is a absolute energy that you both feel and give to the audience. And that reciprocal synergistic exchange, there's just nothing like it. And anybody who's been a performer knows that.
Right.
Which is also, I think, why it's really hard for some folks who, I've spent years also, performing in nightclubs, performing in, bars, juke joints, restaurants and stuff. And there are going to be those nights.
There are.
You may know where you're stuck on a stool in a corner and nobody's paying attention to you. And a lot of musicians, man, they can't deal with that. If they aren't getting that energetic feedback, it's just me, on the other hand, I don't mind. I can peace out and just kind of, direct that energy inward, you might say. Now, for a stand-up comic, man, that energy and that that exchange you're having with the audience. I'm not a comic, but that's so interesting to hear that you're doing that.
You could do it easily. You could do it very easily. But there's something about it. If you're up there playing and you botch a note, you botched it, man. There's no going back, and people cringe, and you can cover it a little bit, but you messed it up. Just like me, if I'm in there and I mess up a joke, you can't say, "Oh, let me start over again." And it's something about it. But I love that pressure. I love that. You got to do it, man. And I think it lends to life and to spirituality too. If we can learn to have that Katie bar the door, damn the torpedoes, here we go, let's do it.
That's absolutely right. Yes, absolutely right.
Now, you said you're doing some things with Native American archaeology and history now. Please tell us about that. And I got a cool Native American story for you as well.
Great. Yeah, I always love them. What kind of has gotten me involved in all this? Okay, so Jeff, the last time I saw you, we were at the event together, and one of our speakers was Randall Carlson. You remember?
Yes.
Yeah, Randall and his talks about, now that's geology, but that plays that figures heavily into this, because I remember Randall giving his talk, and it was funny because he was talking about geology and ancient cataclysms, which is so much what I'm involved with these days. I was giving a talk that year about secret societies, and Randall, he's a high-ranking Freemason, and he came up to me after the event or after the talk and everything and just really wanted to chat. And before we left that weekend, he had reached out and said, look, I'm going to be up there near Asheville in your neck of the woods doing a private gathering at some folks' house. They like to have me come out and just, give one of my, now it's not really a lecture. It's more like I don't know if you could even really call it a presentation. It's more like, again, going to college and hearing a proper lecture. Again, he's standing at the lectern, he's got his projector, and he talks for 5 hours. Yeah, it's this group of people, and he's giving us this breakdown of again, catastrophic geology, coinciding with what's known as the Younger Dryas, which occurred about 12,900 years ago. Now, the Younger Dryas, not disputed. Again, this was simply a period of abrupt, in fact, many would call it the model for abrupt climate change in the ancient world, where coming out of the Pleistocene, the Ice Age, what we see suddenly is as temperatures are beginning to warm, we have at about, several hundred years of cold reversal where it goes cold again. The temperatures drop back down, and then they finally start picking up again, and eventually temperatures warm, and we enter the Holocene, the current geological epoch in which we now exist. Now, I was interested in all of that before I met Randall, because I was familiar with a paper that had been published, maybe a couple of decades ago, by Richard Firestone and William Topping, that was talking about the idea there was evidence for a cataclysmic event that occurred in Paleo-Indian times. Now, Paleo-Indian, and I can cheat, I've got a chart over here on the wall of projected point sequences of South Carolina. So I've got all the different eras and also the different kinds of lithics, or again, stone tools that occur in that era. So if we're talking about the Paleo-Indian period, generally we're talking about probably from about, I guess we could say, in the neighborhood of about 11,000 really to 14,000 years. Beyond 11,000 and nearer to the present, we're getting into the Archaic period. So in Paleo-Indian times, we had something happen around 12,900 years ago. Again, geologically speaking, there is plenty of evidence for this. And naturally, what happens when the warming begins is, of course, the glacial ice that is accumulated around the poles begins to melt off. And we know that there's geological evidence of pulses of meltwater that run off, from glacial Lake Agassiz, into the North Atlantic, all these kind of things. Now, the general model had been that as natural deglaciation is occurring, the cold ice water that's running off into the North Atlantic actually disrupts what's called the thermohaline circulation, basically just the Gulf Stream. And then what ends up resulting is this disruption of the natural ocean currents causes a cold reversal. Colder temperatures get caught up in the northern hemispheres. There are some warmer pockets. It was warm and wet where I am here in the Southeast, all the way down to where you were in Florida a few years ago during that same period. Now, none of that is sensational. Again, I'm merely saying that logically speaking, we know that this happened. What is very unusual is that a number of years ago, Topping and Firestone, of course, proposed that there was some evidence for a cataclysm that occurred around that same time. And people began to suggest, hey, maybe there was something more than just the natural meltwater runoff cooling the North Atlantic and disrupting the ocean currents and causing this cool period for hundreds of years. And the mounting evidence in recent years strongly suggests that there was indeed something extraterrestrial in origin. And by that, I mean, of course, a impact event of some kind, or at very least, an asteroid or a comet that may have entered Earth's atmosphere and then exploded, an air burst before an actual impact occurred, and nonetheless widespread devastation that actually triggers sudden melting and then the subsequent cold reversal. And this concept I'm outlining here is what's known as the Younger Dryas, which refers to the period.
Gotcha.
Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Now, Randall is a strong proponent of this. And when I began to study his work,
he is a strong proponent.
I mean, he is probably also one of the most well-known after being on Joe Rogan's podcast and a number of shows. But after meeting Randall and attending a couple of lectures, I began working with a great colleague of mine, Jason Pentrail. He's an environmental scientist, but he's really, really fascinated with archaeology. And then we met another fellow, a geologist named James Waldo. And James and Jason and I began to work together with Southeastern archaeology, and we've gotten to know some true luminaries in the field, like Christopher Moore, PhD, who is a South Carolina archaeologist, who actually was the lead author on a paper, Jeffrey, back in, I guess, 2016 was when it was published in Nature, which identified and this is really, I think, a landmark discovery, he finds a platinum anomaly, okay, in sedimentary layers at multiple different sites, including ice cores from Greenland, which identifies right with this same period, 12,900 years BP. So what we're talking about again is a very strong likelihood that due to the fact that there's a rare earth element, an extraterrestrial impact probably did occur. And he absolutely hit the nail on the head with this. So I remember seeing this all in the news years ago and just being fascinated with this platinum anomaly. Now I regularly talk with Dr. Moore, wonderful guy, truly talented archaeologist, and someone who is, I think, multidisciplinary in his field. Dr. James Kennett out at UCLA as well. I mean, they're, Albert Goodyear, PhD, also in South Carolina. So many archaeologists and geologists have been so willing to speak with me, and we've been able to meet. I've been able to work with a few of them in the field even, working toward understanding this mystery. So there is absolutely the archaeological component, because what many geologists either have only a cursory knowledge of or fail to note altogether is that this climate change event, this Younger Dryas, if an impact occurred, impact theory, it roughly coincides with a great bottleneck. Some say disappearance. I don't think that's correct, but a sharp decline in the human presence. And this would have coincided with what was the Clovis culture in North America and Paleo-Indian North America at that time. So anyway, that in a nutshell is the theory. That's what I'm very, very, very heavily involved with right now. And I will tell you, I think that really within just the last couple of years, we are working toward definitive evidence that would have been considered a crackpot theory a few years ago, but definitive evidence that indeed something far more impactful occurred 12,900 years ago than we once thought.
And that's the great thing about what we do, Micah. A lot of, there is a lot of just plain old crackpot stuff out there, and we are not we're not, I can't think of the word I'm looking for right now, but we're not immune to actually falling prey to some of it or bringing some of it out. But alternative media, alternative researchers, especially ones that are as well-read and well-documented as yourself, we do bring forward and can advance and bring it to the regular Joe and Jane on the street, these type of thoughts. And you mentioned Joe Rogan, and, my entrance back into stand-up comedy has a lot to do with some of Joe Rogan's good buddies. Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Podcast, Eddie Bravo, just hung out with them, going back out to be with them in San Francisco. Chris Jericho of Fozzy, going to be on his podcast. And these are guys that I mentioned because they don't really need to go here. They've got their own genre, they got their own audiences. But when guys like Rogan and Jericho and Tripoli and Bravo begin to step out and embrace the paranormal, embrace the conspiratorial, and start stretching borders and expanding paradigms, I think it's a very, very exciting time to be alive. And I think, Micah, with all the gloom and doom that we hear from so many different fronts and how terrible things are, I'm convinced that the next 5 years are going to be some of the most exciting 5 years to be alive in probably centuries, Mike. I really am convinced of that.
Well, I certainly do too. And there are a couple of terms that come to mind for this. One is, a singularity, but I don't know that that's necessarily the best word. I think I can, come up with a better one, which would be climacteric. Historically speaking, again, the idea of a singularity is borrowed from the physics concept of a black hole. Beyond the event horizon of the black hole, we don't know. Physics tends to break down, and we have a hard time grasping even what happens. And so this term has been borrowed, and some people refer to this, again, technologically speaking, as though we are approaching a technological singularity. Although I think that that's an aspect of this. What I think you're describing is more, some have called it a quickening.
That's a great term from the Highlander, and it applies.
Yeah. But again,
the good news is there can be more than one that can take place in part in this.
Well, certainly. And again, historians, I think, it was probably Felipe Armesto Fernandez, the eminent historian, who always talks about, again, the climacteric is this period. He's not the only historian by any means that talks about this. Many do. But again, the concept that sometimes there are even innocuous events as perceived by those at the time during which they're occurring. But when historians look back, we see that many different elements feeding into periods that lead to great, significant, and sometimes sudden changes, societal, cultural, civilizational shifts. And so, with technology, with the way that so many boundaries are being broken down, open, honest exchange of ideas, is more prevalent thanks to podcasts and the live streaming mediums like this. I do think that informationally, culturally, and otherwise, that, yeah, we're looking kind of at a climacteric, and it's a really damned exciting time to be a part of it, isn't it?
It is. And one of the nice things about doing what we do and getting to a certain level of followers is you have people that have great products and great services that want to make them known to your people. And I'm have the pleasure of working with the folks from Verve, who I think make the very best CBD. It's organic, highly quality controlled. They have their own proprietary process, which yields up to 99% efficiency. It's veteran owned. It's especially geared to curing post-traumatic stress or dealing with it, anxiety, sleep issues, pain issues, and even epilepsy. So go to jeffreydaugherty.com, click on the Verve logo. Rocky Stucci, who says hello to you, by the way. Rocky Stucci, some of our great friends have used it, Travis Thorpe, and swear by it. Go ahead and take a look there. There's some great people. They really are. Now, you do what you do, and I do what I do. And we were out with Rocky, I think it was yesterday or the day before. We were by these Indian mounds, and we're just doing a podcast. And I thought I would go over and just stand by these Indian mounds and see if I could get any type of communication, Micah, just, weird woo-woo me. So I went over there. There was two of them. I went over by one, and I was just standing there and kind of concentrating, just kind of listening. And I'm thinking, do I really want to do this? Because these are, Native American folks that, probably got slaughtered. They got their land stolen. They may be less than, happy to see me or speak to me. But as I stood there and listened, I got a very clear message from them. And there was the one which was on the left hand of where I was. The message was very simple, that there's one earth and there's really only one people. And when we unite as one people and get back in alignment with the one earth, that's when things can really change. And I walked over to the other mound, and the thought that came to me, and the very strong messaging was that, we have all different colors of skins and, wars and all type of hatred amongst each other. But at the end of the day, we all have red blood. We really are all one. So I'm hoping, Micah, that we can get past all this noise and get past all of this dissension and get back to those basic truths: one people, one blood, one earth. And I just can't, I know it seems crazy with the way things are headed now, but I just think, Micah, that we're going to get back to the basics and the reality. And I see good days ahead.
I am so glad you say that, and that you said it how you did. Your story is fascinating, by the way, and right back at Rocky Stucci, a happy hello to him. That guy, Scotty Roberts, yourself, again, just some of my favorite people in the world, obviously. And many of a fellow historically oriented mindset too. We've had a lot of these kind of conversations over the years about these kind of things. Again, you're so fundamentally right with regard to remembering that we are all just people. Archaeology interests me, and so does history, but I think that as my interest in that, again, in America, it's kind of different in Europe, but in America, archaeology is kind of considered a social science and a subdiscipline of anthropology, being the parent field. And looking back at ancient human evolution and history has really, really become preeminently a focus of mine, which is funny because a lot of people, again, when we talk about potentially crackpot ideas, a lot of people would throw something like Sasquatch into that camp. I do not. I take that subject very seriously, and looking at it through the anthropological lens, I think I'm more fascinated with that than ever. And there are a lot of different ways we can approach that.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Talk about it.
Well, yeah, and we can talk about that, certainly. But I do want to say that when you look back at ancient human history, if you look at all the different migratory paths that people have taken, not just entering the New World, but also just, coming out of Africa, when you look back at ancient human ancestry before Homo sapiens sapiens, we look at the genetic data that we now have supporting not only mitochondrial DNA evidence in our bloodstream, many of us today, that supports the fact that we were living very close and even interbreeding with Neanderthal and also Denisovans and other extinct as yet unidentified hominins. Okay. There is both the question of what does it mean to be human that comes to mind, and then there's also the awareness of an infinitely more complex history to
wow, well put.
We are here today that really comes to mind. And so again, for me, the big takeaway, just to come back to your point, is that yes, we are all brothers and sisters right here. And I know this sounds like a happy, feel good, love and light kind of a message. But honestly, sometimes we need that. We are all one people. We are all in this together. There are horrible things that have happened to different minority groups and things as a result of colonialism and expansion, the conquest that has occurred over the last thousands of years. But again, at the end of the day, what we can recognize is that we are all one people, and we can hope to do the very best and to embrace one another better than at any time before and move together as one group, humanity.
Absolutely.
That is so true. And so I'm glad that you phrase it the way that you do. Now, if we're to talk about a kind of a fun subject, although I think subjects like that need to be addressed, and again, I thank you for bringing.
You're going to go to Bigfoot.
We can do that.
Here's a nice segue for it. Rocky and I and Scotty was there, and several other people. We were out in the woods. I don't know if they ever took you to those haunted woods out there in Faribault, but we were out in these haunted woods, and we're making a lot of paranormal contact and having a lot of interesting things going on. Helped out a lot of people. Travis Thorpe and I were able to do some cleansing, some high magic ritualistic cleansing, and we think leave it in a better place. And I came back and was doing a podcast the next morning, and I didn't even notice it, Micah, but all of the people are commenting, there's orbs around you, there's orbs around you all over the place. And as I went back and looked at the video, I really think, and we're getting to nature, Bigfoot type stuff, I really think that maybe being out there in the woods, having a positive, helpful attitude, trying to do our best to do good magical hygiene, as Travis would say, and to just be a positive force, not just trying to catch an EVP or trying to catch an apparition, but trying to be a positive spiritual force out there. It's my theory, after looking at that video, that I may well have had a number of fae or elemental earth spirits that follow me back. We're just kind of sharing the love. And with that, you can move into Bigfoot. What's your opinion on that, first of all?
I'm very open-minded, and I will say this, even though when I'm operating on the scientific partition, so to speak, Scotty and I have talked about this.
And you're big on that, and that's one of the reasons why I like having you on.
I am big on scientific. Again, you might call it I'm a practical science-oriented thinker in terms of I try to first explain things in scientific terms. And so one of the problems I actually have with, the Sasquatch community is that there are some people who say, we're never going to find this. We're never going to solve this mystery because these things step through portals from other dimensions and they are not of our reality. Now,
the whole green haze crowd, right?
And yes, and for me, the green haze, the problem I have with that is because, so let's say that it seems that is a plausible theory to work with. Well, the problem for me is that if we don't rule out the idea that we are dealing with a strictly physical, biological phenomena first, and we start leaping to the conclusion where we are dealing in the realm of speculation, and furthermore, a speculation line that is not one that is inherently easily proven through science, we may be doing a great disservice. Now,
we're not going to say crackpot theory, but
but here's the thing, though, too. When you're talking about visiting, again, many of the Mississippian mounds and other Native American and First Nations heritage sites, I know the kind of feelings you're talking about where you get there and there is, again, for some people, it's just a profound recognition. I would call it that if I'm to completely just secularize it.
Right.
But others might say that, they feel a profound presence. And I do believe in the possibility that there are other things beyond, our consensus reality, five senses. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But for me, that's on a separate partition from my scientific logical one, right? And I'm comfortable being able to step over from one partition to the other, but not, again, when I'm looking at Sasquatch, that doesn't mean, well, if I feel like I need to say he's a paranormal entity, I'll do that. For me, and this is just speaking for me, but again, open though I am to those concepts, Sasquatch is something that, if it exists, it is one of two things. It is a cultural phenomena, which is based on a sort of a meme that has been present for a long time. The meme of the wild person or of the beast. It is an extension of ourself psychologically in the Jungian sense, we might call this.
Fascinating.
Of the shadow, But if it is not simply that culturally, then there must be something out there. And I would have to say this, and again, Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, who is one of the leading proponents of the existence of a physical creature he identifies as Sasquatch, Jeffrey Meldrum of Idaho State University, he, like many, has said, look, sure, there are going to be hoaxes, there are going to be misinterpretations, there are going to be false positives, there are going to be all kinds of stuff. But All it takes is one real footprint or one real legitimate sighting where a person saw exactly what they said they saw.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it takes. And if one of them is true, it's all bets are off.
Yeah.
Then we're dealing with a tangible, seemingly tangible phenomena that is worthy of study. Now, let me give you a quick couple of examples, if I may.
And I saw one once. We'll talk about that.
Did you? Oh, God. Yeah, we got to talk about that.
Yes.
But again, someone else who saw one was George Morrison, who was the park naturalist at Crater Lake National Park.
I've heard this, yes.
Back in 1976, he was the naturalist at the park. He was out there doing work in the summer of 76. It was, I think, the month of June, date of 7th or 8th of that month. And he, just before dusk, but broad daylight, he's able to see very clearly. He sees a bipedal large creature covered in hair walk across the road and go down a bank into the forest. And it really, really frightens him. Now, a lot of people go, huh, neat story. Well, currently I actually have a pending Freedom of Information Act request that I filed with the National Park Service, because if such an event occurred, and I found notes about it from a couple of park rangers who logged it in a unofficial history of the park that they wrote, I'm like, perhaps there is other documentation that we can find to support that circumstance. So for me, again, it's not just these are neat stories. It's not even just, let's try and study this biologically. I mean, I want to try and find every kind of evidence that you can possibly ascertain in support of the existence of these things. And yes, absolutely, we need anecdotal reports from people who say that they've had the experience. But for me, again, yeah, the idea probabilistically, statistically, that so many people could say that they have seen something and that there's such continuity from description to the next, and that they are all misperception or misidentification or hoaxes or imaginations or, psychotic breaks from reality. I mean, Jeffrey, it just makes no sense that they could all be easily explained.
I agree.
And dismissed that way.
I agree. I was about 17 years old, no idea of paranormal, nothing like that. I'm playing football, trying to get a scholarship to college. My dad and I were driving late at night in Florida, and he had to pull over and answer nature's call. And I'm sitting there with a pizza on my lap, and it was fall, so it was nice. So we had the windows open, and the car was still running, and the headlights were on. I'm sitting there eating this pizza, and out of the woods from my right to my left walks this, looked to be about 7 foot tall, long, shaggy hair, grayish, orangish, what we call a skunk ape in Florida. And I immediately know why we called it a skunk ape, because the stench was, it almost made you, gag a little bit. Very, very strong smelling. And he starts smelling the air because he smells my pizza. And I'm thinking, oh, crap, he's going to come after this pizza. And he looks at me, and then my dad comes out of the woods. He looks at my dad. My dad looks at me. I look at my dad. We're like, what are we going to do? And it was almost Micah, like he looked at us, and the skunk ape kind of just like shrugged his shoulders and said, oh, hell, these guys aren't worth it. And he just sauntered across the road and disappeared into the deep woods there in Central Florida. And, I didn't know anything about any of this back then. And it's just amazing. My dad will talk. My dad's not into this at all. He'll verify it. I saw it, and it was the craziest thing. And I thought he was going to come for that pizza, and I thought I was in trouble there for about 3 seconds, but then he just kind of shrugged, and walked away.
Wow. Can I ask you a funny question?
Please.
What was the topping on the pizza? Do you remember?
It was the same thing my dad always got: sausage, pepperoni, and mushroom.
Sausage, pepperoni, and mushroom. One of the reasons I wondered about, what time of day was it, by the way?
It was probably somewhere between midnight and 2 a.m.
Oh, okay. Do you remember any features about the face that stood out? I know you're the interviewer, but I've got to ask these questions.
No. I'm just trying to go back in my mind and remember it. It appeared, kind of like a classic prognathic ridge, but it was more kind of flat and probably, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but somewhere between what a gorilla would look like and a Neanderthal, somewhere in there. Flat, but yet a prognathic ridge, and not really much hair on the face.
Mm-hmm. Anything about the eyes at all?
It was all I could really see, because he was in the car light was just reflection. The eyes were reflective. I remember that, but I couldn't see color or anything. The fur was kind of grayish, but it had sort of a kind of a red tinge to it.
Mm-hmm. So reddish tinge. And any kind of color that the eyes reflected at all?
No, all I could see was like a cat eye or a gator eye, just a reflection from the headlights.
So you've seen gator eyes and cat eyes reflect like that, and that's what you'd compare that to?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting, man. I'll tell you, here's the thing that
would they have eyes that were reflective like that? Does that make sense?
Well, here's the funny thing. Every person I've spoken to who throughout the Southeast and I've spoken to military service members, I've spoken to others who have claimed to have seen these things, especially in the Southeast, people always denote, or rather they describe seeing eye shine.
Yeah.
As primates, that's what produces the eye shine is what's called the tapetum lucidum. And it's a reflective membrane that nocturnal animals possess. But the only primates that have it are lemurs, like in Madagascar, right?
Isn't that fascinating?
But here's the thing that's fascinating to me about that. If you go all the way back in ancient history, if you look at and I'm not trying to make a explicit comparison or to say that Grendel, the nemesis of Beowulf in the Anglo-Saxon epic, is a Sasquatch. I'm not saying that at all. But you notice that if you go back in history, there are very interesting parallels to what we might call the modern Sasquatch phenomenon. And one does appear in Beowulf, where if you go all the way back to the Noel Codex in the original Anglo-Saxon, earliest written version of the Beowulf text, there's a word that they use to describe Grendel, because Grendel, according to Seamus Henry's translation, he would describe Grendel very kind of Grendel is described very sparingly. It's almost in an H.P. Lovecraftian sense of allowing the mind of the reader to do the work.
Well put, yes.
But he is described as warped in the shape of a man, but larger than a man, of an unnatural birth. This is essentially how Grendel is described. And then later there's a description of a almost scaly kind of an arm when Beowulf actually rips it off of him. But
right.
But the other thing is that there's a word that is used, Skeodegenga, I believe is the word, which translates to shadow walker or night goer. Seems to describe a nocturnal creature.
Yes.
Now, again, Linnaeus also, the father of taxonomy, described these different alleged human relatives, and one, Homo troglodytes, also was supposedly a nocturnal. Again, Silvestris was one of the words in the Latin, wild, and then nocturnus. He said that this was basically a wild, nocturnal human, hairier than we are. So it's fascinating to me that in so many historical instances, we actually see references to nocturnal creatures. Native American mythology, if you want to call it mythology,
right.
I have a slight issue with that. But again, Native American folklore always describes nocturnal creatures when they're referring to anything that might be likened to these things. So that is very interesting. But there's a famous photograph that I think appeared in 2000 or 2001. They're known as the Micah skunk ape photographs. And these photographs depict a large, hairy orangutan-like creature, but it is apparently emitting eye shine in the reflection of the flash of the camera. Which
I did not know that. That makes me feel better about what I saw.
Well, it's incredible to me because I've seen the eye shine that alligators produce.
Mm-hmm.
It's very striking. And again,
but the eyes weren't red like a gator's would be, just the reflective shine like a cat or a dog.
And many animals have different colors. Like a gator can produce an almost red eye shine. Cats, more of a bluish or a green.
Right.
But, most often the Sasquatch, if seen, people describe a glowing red eyes, but that's not always the case.
Sure.
I spoke with a legendary conservationist and big game hunter, former big game hunter. Then he became a conservationist and a Sasquatch hunter. But Peter Byrne, who he was on In Search of, the classic.
Yes, absolutely.
Day. And I spoke to Peter Byrne recently on the telephone for about an hour, and he described an experience where a person saw one of the creatures in the Pacific Northwest at night, and he said that they had shown a flashlight on the face. And I asked him specifically, do you recall there being any eye shine? And he said no. He said that light reflected off the eye, but it wasn't like an eye shine. It was simply light reflecting off the eye. So Peter described that in the Northwest, the observer that he spoke with, who had this good look at the thing's face, didn't describe that tapetum, but you do hear it an awful lot, especially in the Southeast, which makes your
that's interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So there could be some variation within the species, of course. That wouldn't be unimaginable.
Not unimaginable at all. And again, many have argued, when you bring up a subject like this, they're like, okay, well, if there were a massive ape-like creature in North America, where's the evidence in the fossil record? Sorry, not convinced. Well, to that I would say, where is the evidence of chimpanzees and gorillas in the fossil record? Now, you can go back and you can see ancient possible ancestors of modern gorillas like Dryopithecus, but gorillas and chimpanzees are not in the fossil record. One of the reasons why is the habitat in which they exist. Again, what we're seeing a very tropical, very moist environment. It's not conducive to fossil formation where they actually live. Much can be said the same of especially the Pacific Northwest and other areas allegedly where these creatures inhabit. But the other problem I think that we see is that people are unaware of the peculiar history of primates in the Americas. We do have North American primates. The Mexican spider monkey is one example. One of the earliest predecessors, one of the ancient ancestors of all modern primates, I think was found in Wisconsin. Now, this is millions of years old, but it was found in Wisconsin. There are more recent ancestors of tarsids and the like that have been found in Louisiana. There was a Pleistocene capuchin monkey that was a very large, Pleistocene again being the Ice Age.
Right.
So at the end of the Ice Age, we had in parts of extreme South North America and then South America, we had a very large capuchin monkey. So again, there were 3 different species, I think, of similar monkeys that had been found, again now extinct, but that were found in Southern California just a few years ago. So there is actually some evidence in the fossil record. And yes, there were at one time monkeys in North America. There are probably reasons why we can't find the fossils. I'm very interested in the continuing reports of possible extant primates in North America, whatever they may be, more monkey-like, more ape-like, or indeed if they are bipedal, and as especially the Pacific Northwestern Sasquatch is alleged to be if they are more human-like. I mean, that it's perhaps remote, but it's a tantalizing possibility. But what am I supposed to say, Jeffrey, to people like you who say, look, I saw the thing?
Mm-hmm. I saw it, and there's no denying that I saw it. My dad doesn't even like to talk about it, but when push comes to shove and maybe a couple light beers from Miller, he will admit that we did see it. And it's a crazy thing, Micah. We live in a crazy world. As we move into our final segment, this is brought to us by the folks at StemLight, who have the very best umbilical stem cells that help speed healing time, repair osteoarthritic joints, reduce the need for pain medications, increase collagen production, generate even new heart and blood vessel tissue. They're great people. They're working with a lot of disabled veterans. Again, go to jeffreydaugherty.com, click on the StemLight logo, and find out all you need to know about this new technology. And I want to impress that it does come from umbilical stem cells that are donated, so there's no concern with any of the things along that nature. One of the things on your website, Micah, it says that you're into sci-fi and entertainment. What's your feelings on whether or not sci-fi entertainment is used to do what some would call soft disclosure, or what others would say to prepare our minds for possible UFO-related false flags to come in the future?
Well, that's an interesting and contentious debate that you bring up right there, because again, there's all this ongoing dispute over the key player in the Pentagon's UFO program. I'm going to go ahead and say alleged UFO program.
I like that you say that.
Yeah, it's not to say it didn't exist. That's more to say that we don't know exactly what the program was. One official document that was released to Stephen Aftergood of the Federation of American Scientists refers to it as the Advanced Aerospace Threat and Identification Program, but later in the document also refers to it as a contract. The fact that it's referred to as a contract and that there was only, I think, $22 million appropriated for it, it makes a very strong case in my mind that what we're looking at is a study, limited in scope, similar to past studies like the Rand Corporation study that was done, I believe, in the 1960s, which essentially are assessments, most often in relation to threat assessments in regard to whether or not UFOs may pose any kind of threat to the public or to the military, to humanity in general.
Right.
There is plenty of historic precedent for the fact that, again, governments are interested in the threat assessment potential, and that seems to be, by virtue of the name, Advanced Aerospace Threat and Identification Program. That seems to be exactly what they were looking at. And I think it was essentially a program limited in study, and hence why I refrained from calling it a program and actually say it may have been a study or a contract. But that's
terrible. Not a whole lot of money being thrown at something when we're talking about governmental spending.
Right. it's nothing. I mean, dude, if you look at the annual budget of the Pentagon, in years past, it's been somewhere in the neighborhood of 5.5 billion, but I think the last fiscal year it was close to 750. We are looking at a huge budget, and that $22 million thrown toward, again, threat assessment with regard to unidentified flying objects that could be ours, could be Russia's, China's, or somebody else's. We don't know. But again, it all has sort of hinged in the recent dialogue around this Luis Elizondo fella. I've never spoken to Lou. I would love to talk to Lou. I want very badly to believe that Lou is exactly who he says he is. I in that sense, I guess, call me Fox Mulder. I want to believe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But, again, I am too much of a skeptic to commit to belief that, okay, you know what? I worked on UFOs. We have released 3 pieces of footage that show what, really?
Right.
Not a whole lot. We have testimony from some excellent pilots, who have encountered things, and people are apoplectic and acting like this is the biggest revelation, of all time. There is a tremendous amount of data already in the narrative or in the UFO literature that describes far more interesting things. But and I've spoken to former military police, officers. I've spoken to people, members of the Air Force, the Navy, many different branches of government who have either an interest in this or who have shared just their own observations of things they couldn't explain. Civilian pilots. I've poured through NASA's aviation safety reporting system database looking for reports of these things and have found several. Again, I couldn't give you an idea of what the UFO phenomena, if there is such a thing in terms of the broader umbrella, what could they be, where are they from? I couldn't tell you what they are, where they're from. As far as threat assessment, there doesn't appear to be any threat, and I don't think people really need to be afraid, but I am very skeptical of anyone who comes out saying, you know what, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to work with our friends in, the rock and roll and entertainment community, as well as our friends formerly from government. I happen to be a former counterintelligence agent myself, and maybe still am one, but we're going to find out what these things really are. Stay tuned for more, ladies, right after this. Come on.
And Mike, I was in the U.S. Air Force, and for 6.5 years, I was a flight crew member. I logged thousands of flight hours in a C-130 where I'm right in the cockpit, and I never saw nothing. That's just me. Maybe I was unlucky, but I never saw anything. What do you think about, and I'm trying not to be skeptical, I'm trying not to let any of my personal feelings bleed through, but it seems like these days when you go on to paranormal or conspiratorial radio, you can't throw a rock without hitting somebody that was part of the secret space program, and it bounces off them and hits somebody else that was part of the secret space program, and then lands in the lap of yet another person that was part of the secret space program. What do you make of all that?
Well, here's the thing. If there is a secret space program,
it ain't very secret anymore, but anyway.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. What it would entail is the murky world of companies that are subcontracted by government agencies. Mm-hmm. I've got a good pal, Brett Tingley, who writes for The War Zone, Tyler Rogaway's excellent military and aviation defense blog. The War Zone really kind of rose to prominence, I think, a couple of years ago when they started reporting on a very bizarre incident involving an aircraft with no transponder. At least it was turned off, and it was flying at a clip over Oregon. And Tyler went on Fox News and actually talked about this. And he continued to report.
That is odd.
Yeah. And he has continued to report on this. He's reported on the ATFLIR system developed by Raytheon that's been utilized by the Navy jets that are having these encounters with these alleged aircraft. But Tyler approaches it from a very grounded perspective. And so Brett Tingley, he actually lives here in Asheville, and he's a writer for The War Zone. We were talking about this recently. I had him on the Micah Hanks program, my podcast, the other day. And he had said, I'm looking at both that idea of there being the subcontracted element that could account for some Navy technologies, which he's written 2 excellent pieces exploring these patents that were filed by this guy, Salvatore Pais. He's a Navy physicist. And he wonders, again, does the Navy already have this technology? Are they trying to capitalize on it now? Are there companies that are subcontracted by government that already make these things? Or is there even maybe a private company somewhere that could be capable of producing similar things? We look at all these things, but I asked him the same thing. I said, if indeed it had any government component, and if indeed it was managed in such a way that it was kept secret conveniently like that, then could we call this a secret space program? And maybe the way to look at that, Jeffrey, is if we don't really already have a secret space program, we're going to have one. But I mean, however you want to phrase it, I can't help but think that there are some very novel aviation technologies that are in development and have been in development for a number of decades. And the best, for instance, again, to make a very long story short and kind of pin the tail on the donkey here, one of the best examples that I can think of that seems to be indicative of that are these great big flying black triangles people claim that they see.
Yeah, and we have seen those.
I have tracked you say you have?
I said we have seen those. Personally, I have not, but we've got pretty convincing footage and a lot of people seeing them, and so I think we can say that they have been sighted with a high degree of confidence.
I have interviewed at least a dozen people over the years who have described seeing the exact thing. I've interviewed them on the radio. I've interviewed them privately. They've emailed me. I've corresponded with people. It's come up in random conversations with family members. My father even saw 3 points of light moving very quickly and silently over the interstate coming back. He's a musician like I am, and he and a friend were coming back from a gig one night, and they said that this thing traveled directly over the highway like that, completely silently, 3 points of light, very large. But again, many people have described seeing these aircraft. My geologist, James Waldo, when he was in the Army, I think he was in Afghanistan and saw one of these things fly overhead. So, but that seems to suggest to me that it's more likely that we're dealing with some kind of earthly technology.
I would agree. Now, you've also written and talked recently about UFOs and espionage.
Yeah, UFOs and espionage. I guess, for instance, Nick Redfern, a longtime pal of mine, I had him on the show recently because he had actually written a book called Flying Saucers in the Kremlin. And I'm very interested in that espionage angle. I think Nick is too, obviously. And he's one of the best people to talk to about this sort of stuff because Nick has looked for a long time at the ways that different world powers may use the UFO phenomena or belief in the apparent presence of unidentifieds as a kind of smokescreen. And that's probably in truth what influences my own skepticism about UFOs, because I'm not skeptical that there are unidentified aircraft that we can't account for. I mean, who knows where they're from? That to me is only one of many questions we should be asking about these things. But again, more importantly to me is the fact that we have historical precedent for, for example, Paul Benowitz back in the 1980s. He had been intercepting radio communications with regard to things that were being tested out there by the NSA at Kirkland Air Force Base. And so he's given a computer program and encouraged to believe that these are alien signals he's intercepting. And there was a film that my good pal Mark Pilkington, he'd actually written a book about this called Mirage Men, and they later turned that into a documentary. I advise everybody, watch it if you haven't seen Mirage Men. If you don't think that there is a counterintelligence element to the way that people's belief in the UFO phenomena, the cultural phenomena that is the fascination we have with the idea of UFOs, whatever they may be, wherever they may be from, and that hasn't been used to the advantage of intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
In the interest of national security, maybe that's a good thing, but by the same token, as a freedom-loving American, I don't like being lied to by my government, right?
Absolutely.
So something that we need to be aware of, the reality of government interest and the reasons why they would take interest in these subjects. And that's one of them. Again, sometimes it's advantageous for them to be involved.
It is. Just a little bit of fun at the end here, Micah. Yeah. I told you I've been doing some comedy, spent a couple hours with Eddie Bravo.
Yeah.
And of course, whenever you spend a couple hours with Eddie Bravo, the subject of flat earth is going to be chief amongst your discussion. Now, Eddie Bravo is not a nut. Eddie Bravo is not a dummy. Eddie Bravo is a sharp guy. He's an intelligent guy, very nice guy. And Eddie Bravo is as flat earth as they come. As a philosopher, as a science-minded individual, how do you account for the staying power and the conviction with which intelligent individuals and the devotion towards this idea of flat earth? Please, Mike, if you could explain it for us all, it would really help out.
Well, with all respect to Eddie, love him, but he needs to fly transatlantic flights more often because, and I'm telling you, here's the thing we won't get into all the evidence for why the earth isn't flat. I mean,
what about the idea? What gives it its staying power and its appeal to very smart people? Not all of them, but a lot of them, very smart people.
Well, see, what's interesting is you look at the way I approach Sasquatch, You look at the way I approach UFOs, and many people would go, "Oh, he's a damned skeptic." And then many skeptics would go, "Oh, look, this guy's no better than the crazy, kooky believers." And meanwhile, I'm standing in the middle and I go, well, look, I'm interested in these subjects. I'm interested in the proliferation of ideas. I'm interested in, even if there is no phenomena, why people believe those things and why they commit to belief in them. And
very similar to my current stance on flat Earth.
Well, and that's the thing, is that, again, with flat Earth, I think that many people commit to belief in something that, A, helps them feel that they are a part of a community. Many people commit, and that's certainly the case with the UFO phenomenon, especially. You go to a UFO event and you'll see people who are there more to be a part of something bigger than themselves.
And that's not all bad, is it, Micah Hanks?
No, I don't think it's all bad at all, but I definitely think that when we started seeing flat Earth conventions popping up, that's when I began to realize this is reaching critical mass as a social movement. That, I think, is...
Yeah, Coast to Coast reported on that several times.
Yeah, and again, really, we could just leave it right there, because I think that's the biggest fundamental element, that it has become a sort of a social movement. And from time to time, and I think that the true, the person who seeks to understand the mysteries of our existence and do so scientifically and with a rational mind, don't be skeptical just because people tell you that that's the way you're supposed to be. Don't believe just because you want to. Always ask questions, always challenge your own belief systems, and fundamentally challenge yourself. Ask yourself the hard question: am I doing this because it makes me feel good, because people like me, because I get invited to events, and because I feel like something bigger than I am by myself? I think that's in large part the appeal people see in it.
Interesting. Now, something you do really well at, Micah, that I wish that more people could do, and what I'm trying to do myself, is, with example, with your thoughts on Sasquatch. It takes the easy way is to pick a side and go all that way and damn everybody that's not on that side. I think what's really needed within our genre and within humanity in general is the ability to entertain competing thoughts simultaneously within our brains, mental plasticity or elasticity, if you will. You seem to do very well at that. How would you encourage people, if you would, to develop similar types of open-mindedness to allow for interchange and exchange of ideas outside of a narrowly defined paradigm, which of necessity excludes people, and to be more inclusive as a genre and as humanity as a whole?
You've got to listen to other people. And you've got to allow people.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
You've got to listen to people.
Kidding, little joke.
Oh, that was good. No, I see he is a comedian, folks. You got to listen to people, though. You've got to, if you are a skeptic, then pick up a book on Sasquatch by a scientist who has put his career on the line.
Can you recommend one?
To try and look at it credibly. If you are a believer in Sasquatch, go pick up a book by skeptics. Challenge yourself to see their arguments against it. If you are on the political left, go and read a conservative publication. If you're a political conservative, go read a liberal publication. Challenge yourself to look outside of your own bias bubble. That's the only way. You've got to expose yourself to new ideas. It ain't going to hurt you. It ain't going to scare you. You're not going to get branded. Again, what you will do is you will expose yourself to an alternative perspective. And then if you are brave, if you're truly brave, if you're truly a truth seeker, speaking in that philosophical sense of universal truths, if such a thing exists, then if you are truly brave, you will be willing to ask yourself the hard fundamental question: are my own beliefs as strong as I thought they were before I challenged myself and read an opposing viewpoint? But I don't think many people who are on the skeptical side, or people on the belief side, or on the far right or far left political side, or whatever, they often don't want to do that, because people are happier just looking at all the information that feeds their confirmation bias. So if you want to be better at being less biased, challenge your beliefs and your biases.
Absolutely. Great advice, Micah. Time travel possible or not?
In Einstein's theory of relativity, it is entirely possible as a generic feature of relativity. However, it seems highly unlikely it will be achieved as a result of the complex nature of time travel. Physically, it would be so difficult to implement, it's almost impossible. Theoretically, it absolutely exists.
So you would not believe that Donald Trump is a time traveler?
He's not.
He's not. I would agree. I don't know. He
might have traveled to the future from the Stone Age. I'm not sure.
Very well put, Micah. Very subtle and yet very effective. I like that. Micah Hanks, please tell people where they can get in touch with your information.
Absolutely. It's micahhanks.com. That is my website. If you head to micahhanks.com/podcast, that is where you can find all episodes of the Micah Hanks program. But again, if you actually just go to my website, Micah Hanks, there are all the links there at the top about everything. Click the podcasts. It'll take you down. I've got all different kinds of podcasts. I do a nonpartisan news and current events podcast called Middle Theory. The Micah Hanks program is science, mysteries of our existence, ancient enigmas, archaeology, space, all this good stuff. UFOs come up an awful lot on that program. Mm-hmm. And then for the archaeology and history enthusiasts, we have the 7 Ages audio journal that is.
I listened to that today. It was excellent.
Yeah.
So now, is Middle Theory truly nonpartisan talk and discussion?
I attempt to be that way, but it is very hard to be that way because, again, people, there are always two responses. They're like, you're much further to the right than you think you are. And then there's also the people who say you're much further to the left than you think you are. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a pretty good gauge of how centrist I try to be, but I don't do that just to try and make people happy. I always have my own personal views about things. And on an issue for issue basis, it may fall a little further to the right or a little further to the left. But the thing is that in the media, there was a time long ago, you remember this, I'm sure, my man, where everything was supposed to be just the facts, fair and balanced, all the news that's fit for print. Nowadays, it doesn't sell if it hasn't got a bias, an extreme bias. If it leads, and it's got to be bleeding. And so at what point did we get to a point where we couldn't take information if it wasn't so biased? And again, feeding to those biases of our own. So for that podcast, again, what I do, Middle Theory, I look at news, current events, yes, some politics, but not just politics, history. I look at all different kinds of things, and I try to look at them and report on them truly, fairly, and balanced.
You know what that's called, Micah Hanks?
Pissing everybody off.
No, that's called true journalism, and it's falling on us. The professional journalists won't do it anymore by and large. So it falls on us to raise a higher standard and actually become independent, true, objective journalists. And I hope that we can rise to that standard.
I hope so too. And just one final thought,
Please. And also tell us if you got any musical gigs coming up.
I will, yeah. And although I don't have all that many, but again, if you just go online, search for Nitrograss or for Micah Hanks guitar, you'll probably see all kinds of videos. There's all sorts of stuff on YouTube.
Perfect.
Playing. But, I heard Joe Rogan recently complaining about how people constantly keep branding him, far right. And he says, if anything, I fall more on the political left. He says, but it doesn't matter if I tell you that because, again, the masses have spoken. Because he doesn't regurgitate everything the media says, he gets branded far right. And it's like, again, to me, these are all little thermometers, little symptoms of the broader phenomena that we're seeing culturally. And again, like you said earlier, the fact that we're doing this, the fact that we're having conversations like this, and the fact that we can discuss these things without having to have that kind of sterilized media paid for by Big Pharma, again, whatever slant that you want, left, right, whatever. The fact that we can have these open, honest conversations, that new media like this is allowing for that, this is indeed truly a very exciting time to be alive.
It is. And I think the people that want to criticize Joe Rogan, within a couple of weeks, he had both Alex Jones and Bernie Sanders on. So come on, guys.
Come on, man.
How much more balance can you get?
He's not playing to both sides. He's just trying to talk to people.
He is. Yeah. Well, Micah, it's been a pleasure talking with you tonight. It really has been. It's been too long, and let's try not to let it be this long again.
Yeah, man. Keep in touch, man. I'm always here, and even though I get busy, if you don't hit me the first time, keep knocking, man. I'm always glad to talk to you, and brother, it's always a pleasure, man.
Likewise, it really is. Folks, for Micah Hanks, I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. And as always, I just want to remind you folks, and Mike, if you'd stay there 1 second so I could say goodbye to you personally. I just want to remind you folks, as always, that we are the last generation of real humans, and history is written by the winners. So unless we win, no one will know what we've done here. So let's join together. Let's get busy. Let's win today. And together, we can write a better tomorrow. Until next time, I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, wishing you a very, very good evening.